Hi, I'm John Donnelly, Chief of DC Fire and EMS. We started this video project shortly after January 6th to try and capture the experiences of our employees. This was a unique day. I was very proud of DC Fire and EMS on January 6th. We'd spent a lot of time getting ready for it, and as a result of that, our people were ready to respond. They helped a lot of people that day. I just couldn't be prouder of our efforts. January 6th is unique for the DC Fire Department. It felt like the same type of response issues and challenges, or the same gravity of responding on 9/11. Our people were responding to more than a special event or a protest or a riot. They were responding to the Capitol to protect lawmakers, to support the police, and to really support democracy. It's an important role that we have in DC Fire and EMS, and it's one we're proud of. And the stories you'll hear today are the stories of our experiences during that event.
My name is Danny McCoy, Deputy Fire Chief Special Operations and Homeland Security. On the day of January 6th, I was the area commander. There was some intelligence provided to MPD and other police agencies, reference what crowd sizes and maybe some civil disturbances that could accompany a planned demonstration, a First Amendment protected demonstration that was going to occur on the ellipse. So in preparation for that, we had planned a special event format, and we had upstuffed multiple units, and we had added additional liaisons, transport units, suppression units, and we had pre-positioned them in preparation for the events at the ellipse that morning.
I'm Battalion Fire Chief Christopher Holmes with the District of Columbia Fire and EMS Department. I was assigned to recon. I was supposed to work here in the 3rd Battalion as a Battalion Fire Chief, but I was actually detailed to the event. So I got to work about 5:30, started preparing my items that I would need for a special event like that, make sure all my personal gear was ready. Reported downtown to the operations center that we had for our brief out.
So we started the morning out like every morning we do. We have our briefing at 2 Engine, and we went over what the plan was. We reviewed the operations plan. We reviewed what resources we had assigned, the command structure. And I remember at one point I said, I don't know, what am I missing to the group? I said, we'd be fine as long as everybody stays at the ellipse and they don't march to the Capitol or something like that. It was just a random thought, a random talk, that we had everything else, ready to go. We had received some intel reports from Virginia that large groups there had been some fighting between large groups in Virginia. And that first report of the disturbance was that group was heading towards the ellipse. The resources that we had in place were quickly overwhelmed. There was a large crowd, the people started coming in, so we had to build out an additional command structure, a special event footprint there, and deploy the resources that we had originally staging. In addition to the event at the ellipse, we had a recon unit and a battalion chief out there, and we were monitoring the Capitol, we were monitoring areas around there.
My name is Amy Mauro. I'm Chief of Staff for the Fire EMS Department. So on January 6th, I started the day with Chief Donnelly, who had just gotten his 2nd COVID shot at Kaiser. And after that, we drove around the city. And we drove past the Capitol, and I noticed that they had put bike racks as a perimeter around the whole campus. So it was obvious that their intention was to keep protesters out of the Capitol grounds. And at the same time, there were protesters already at that point streaming down from the ellipse. And then we went to the Fire Operations Center, and we were pretty relaxed. We have these kinds of events all the time.
Was roaming, what we call roaming, with getting eyes on the crowd, starting looking at anything that might pose a life safety hazard, getting with some of our law enforcement agencies, since we have so many law enforcement agencies in the district. We had an established event at the ellipse with a command structure in place to handle what was going on there.
I'm Russell Smith. I'm Battalion Fire Chief for DC Fire EMS Department. I'm currently assigned to the Safety Battalion. So initially I was at the ellipse, and I was in charge of command at the ellipse because that's where the majority of the crowd had mustered.
Hi, I'm Battalion Fire Chief Angelo Westfield. I'm assigned to the 5th Battalion, and on January 6th, I got a call from our area command and was told to respond to the Capitol with the expectation of more protests and demonstrations.
We saw that the crowd was getting larger and larger in size. That's when we decided we'd move a majority of our resources from a roaming position to a stationary position on the outskirts of the crowd.
So as past President Trump began to speak, there were some initial reports that the crowd had started to move.
My name is Craig Baker, and I'm the Assistant Chief of Operations. I arrived at Fire Operations sometime around, I guess, between 12:30 and 1 o'clock. So I arrived really just as things began to start unfolding, and that when we realized that there were large groups moving towards the Capitol. Shortly after that, the first call for assistance came from the Capitol.
We were getting calls for EMS in the crowd, and we could not get resources in there. We couldn't get people to walk in there because the crowd was so compacted.
As the calls started coming in, we realized that there was more people amassing at the Capitol. It seemed like a planned event that they just came. I don't know where everybody came from, but all of a sudden they were there.
Since there was no more use for the resources at the ellipse, they start moving resources down toward the Capitol in a systemic motion, more of we were following the crowd as they were marching, just to make sure if anybody got injured while they were marching, that we could take care of them if there are any issues on the march route.
I requested a battalion chief, some additional suppression resources and EMS resources, and initially just brought them into stage until we could figure out, in preparation for figure out what we're going to do.
I was the initial incident commander, and I was the first arriving battalion chief on the scene. And once I got there, I was the first one to set up, pretty much get everything and try to make unified command and talk to, the U.S. Capitol Police and trying to find out, ascertain what was going on. As I got there, I saw that the situation was developing to be more than a normal protest.
Things just started happening. We started getting phone calls.
There's someone down, and he's having a hard time breathing in front of the United States Capitol. The police have a man up here trying to do CPR, and I don't think they're having much luck.
The first indication of trouble for me on that day was looking up at the screen in the Fire Operations Center and seeing a live feed from Twitter of protesters fist fighting with Metropolitan Police Department officers on the west terrace of the Capitol building. And at the same time that this was happening, the Fire Operations Center area command officials were getting reports of 2 cardiac arrests simultaneously on the Capitol grounds.
MPD dropped to area command. We have a report of 2 patients now at the Capitol.
So I'm firefighter Gary Jekyll. I go by Zeke. On the day of January 6th, I was detailed to Ambulance 18. I'm assigned to Engine 18 and here at the quarters on Capitol Hill. We were originally dispatched for a injured knee from a fall, and we got to the Capitol grounds and came around the north side onto the west lawn and just saw the massive people. And we still thought we were going for an injured knee, but there was a lot of Capitol Police officers running up to our ambulance along with the captain of Engine 13, who was already on scene. Then I got out of the ambulance and the captain ran up to me and said, "It's a cardiac arrest, they're bringing them out now." I look into the mass of people on the west lawn and there's about 20 civilians carrying a backboard with the patient on the backboard and a woman on top of him doing compressions. They run up next to the ambulance and set the patient down, and me and the captain are the only ones there at this point. My partner's getting dressed in her full PPE because, again, we thought we were going for a knee injury and that being a CPR. We put the patient on to the cot and then immediately put the cot in the back. And by that point, a medic had shown up with his ALS equipment, and then we started to render aid in the back of the ambulance to the patient.
My name is Kevin Cole. I'm a firefighter paramedic for District of Columbia's Fire and EMS. On January 6th, I was detailed to Engine 13. My assignment was the lineman, also the lead paramedic on the engine. We were surrounded by U.S. U.S. Capitol Police, and so we were in a secure scene. Immediately started manual CPR.
We got a CPR in progress inside of ambulance 18 right now.
We then had EMS 6 arrive on scene, who assisted me as the second paramedic to help me complete and transport the patient to the hospital. And during that time, we started hearing explosions, which later turned out to be flashbangs or smoke grenades that I don't know who were throwing or deploying. But they didn't affect us because our scene was safe because we had U.S. Capitol Police around our unit.
The tension of the crowd was getting higher and higher. The flashbang grenades were going off around us. Capitol Police had no idea what was going on. We also had no idea what was going on. And myself and the captain from 13 Engine stood outside kind of to keep a perimeter and keep our eyes open as what was going on around us. A few minutes into that, a civilian runs up to us and goes, "There's a man down in the crowd and they're doing CPR." We say, "No, we've got him in the back." He says, "No, I just came from there. They're doing CPR on him."
EMS 6, be advised, we're getting a second call for Independence Avenue Southeast at U.S. Capitol, and a call taker is supposedly giving CPR instructions.
We were notified that there was a second patient, and we had to scramble half of our personnel to go to that cardiac arrest, while some of us stayed here with the cardiac arrest that we were working on.
So the captain has me and another crew member from 13 Engine grab a cot, an AED, oxygen, and just go assess what was going on. So we run with this gentleman through hundreds and hundreds of people.
We have another CPR in progress. Northwest side of the Capitol, just in front of ambulance 18 right now.
Sure enough, there's another individual down with Capitol Police and a couple other civilians around administering CPR. So we get the AED hooked up. Within a couple minutes of that, the crew of 18 Engine showed up with all their ALS supplies and took over. And so I went back to ambulance 18 and within a couple minutes, then drove ambulance 18 with the patient in the back.
EMS 6 to yellow. All right, we're headed to hospital. CPR in progress. Priority 1.
So I'm Rocco Gabriel. I'm a firefighter paramedic at Engine 26. I was on Engine 7. I was riding layout as the paramedic. When we got there, the scene was pretty chaotic. We found a gentleman in his mid-50s lying supine, where CPR had been initiated by a layperson and an AED had been placed on the patient.
My name is firefighter paramedic Glenn Hanna. So I jumped in as the paramedic, and then the wagon driver helped as well, and so did the probationer, who was on the engine with us as well.
We were able to provide some good medicine on scene, at which point the police officers started to disperse concussion grenades over top of our heads to kind of push the crowd back.
It was just an unexplained, why was he in cardiac arrest? Nobody knew, so they were thinking maybe he got injured, maybe it was a stun grenade, and then you heard maybe he tased himself.
The scene kind of got out of control. Became pretty unsafe from that point. As we were exiting the scene, somewhere along the lines, one of the protesters grabbed the ALS bag, which we were, functioning out of, and dumped that or grabbed it and somehow dumped all the contents out. Unfortunately, by the time we got to the medic unit, there was nothing left in it to treat the patient. So we did what we could with what we had, and we drove fast.
EMS serial. I got Engine 7 and Ambulance 8 traumatic arrest, priority 1.
Just getting help to the patient or the patient out to help from their location was extremely challenging.
For the first time in my life, got to see what a true mob mentality was like. It was definitely an experience. I've never seen a group of people that were that worked up and agitated.
It resembled more of what you hear about things that happens in war zones than it does in our nation's capital.
You have a reported working code on the steps?
You have multiple officers injured on the steps. We're not sure where the location will work on that. I need you to organize that and work on staging areas for the transport units, and I need you to provide egress routes and pickup points for persons coming from the Capitol. You have a large crowd coming from the ellipse that way.
A female patient, chief complaint is having a laceration to the left forearm and to the side of her head. Bleeding is controlled at this time.
Shot a grenade at the patient's face. His teeth is out, mouth bleeding.
So as this was all happening, it became obvious that the Capitol Police Command was becoming overwhelmed and needed help. And so Chief Donnelly at that point decided he wanted to go face-to-face with MPD Chief Conti. And so he and I drove over to the Police Operations Center, also known as the JOC. And there we found Chief Conti and Mayor Bowser and her senior staff. And Chief Donnelly and Chief Conti worked together to get into contact with the Capitol Police Chief, and we sent command officials from both of our departments over to his command center to help try and get things under control.
We were trying to figure out if we were going to have a greater demand on our resources, both at the Capitol, and we were also concerned that we were going to have events that occurred at other locations that were going to spread our resources out.
You're going to have to stage units on either side, and then you're going to have to figure out an access point for the Capitol. So I don't want you to remove your assets from the north side and move them to the south side. We deploy units to the south side, and we can put units to the west and east. We may have to surround the Capitol. From the area command, we established a northern and a southern division. We sent a deputy chief to go assume the command of that, and so we established two separate commands underneath the area command. We had the ellipse command, and then we had the Capitol command.
Mitchell Cannery, I'm the Deputy Fire Chief in charge of the Fire Prevention Division, which means I'm the Fire Marshal for the district. So I received a phone call from the Fire Ops Center to go over to assist at the command post at the Capitol. So I did, and I went over there and I assumed command at the Capitol. We set up our command post on the south side of the Capitol, which was right outside the barriers there. We divided the complex into a north and south division where we were able to stage our resources and deploy from there.
So Chief Cannery relieved me, and he became the he became command. And at that point, I then went to the south division, and we had another chief, he got the north division.
Area command directed me to respond to the Capitol and assume the North Division supervisor at Constitution Avenue and New Jersey Avenue.
And we built out the command structure to have a decontamination unit, rehab unit, everything that we would normally have in a command type situation.
It was difficult because in the middle of building out a basic command structure to assist people, you have a riot occurring at the U.S. Capitol.
I was aware of the violent nature of what was going on, and I was hesitant placing a large amount of my personnel in there.
I am Sergeant Alethea Brooks. On January 6th, I was assigned to Truck 7. They were just telling us to stage there. Some people were like super nice and were like, thank you for your service. So I'm like, okay, it's gonna be a good day. But then when you could just like feel the tension, and then that anger just kept escalating and escalating.
We requested some transport units from the surrounding jurisdictions, and we also got some help from the Naval District.
I think Chief Baker ultimately put into place 8 additional engine companies, and we also had maybe 30 additional ambulances that were staffed and came into the city.
One of the things, as a command staff was going through my mind was, we have a potential, if they set this place on fire, that was very high on my mind as far as how would I deploy my members.
We were actually a couple blocks away from where they found the pipe bomb, so that was initially a little concerning, but we were advised pretty early on that we were in a safe enough area, that we were far enough away that we were okay.
I got spat at a couple of times, got called the N-word, quite a few. The guy who was tillering the ladder truck was told that he was a servant, but they would get really close and you'd ask very nicely, can you please step back? And that was when a lot of the degrading talk happened.
Once we saw him start to, go up the stairs towards the Capitol, that's when all of the, that's when everything started to deteriorate.
My name's Tim Bennett. I'm a sergeant. On January 6th, I was working as the recon aide to recon chief. Well, the whole thing was surreal. Just the noise, and they had like these weird bugles they were blowing, like something like from the Planet of the Apes, like Charge.
My aide and myself, Sergeant Bennett, we noticed that it was very unusual because when these devices went off, the crowd didn't react. They didn't back down, they just kept going forward.
I could see the terrace of the Capitol, and around the entire terrace was people, jam-packed with people. And I knew right then and there that that should not ever happen. It's a highly secure area, and if that happened, then I knew the police were overrun at that point.
When I got shoulder bumped and called the N-word like a million times.
I ended up turning to my sergeant and telling them, hey, we need to start prepping for a mass casualty incident.
Hello, my name is Sergeant Martin Sadega. I was detailed to Engine 14 that day. Battalion Fire Chief Westfield ordered us to enter the Capitol building area. I was sitting there in my officer cab. They jumped over the fence. I saw them rocking back the fence, and they actually ran over the CPD.
Engine 14, break to Capitol Command. We're having an issue right now. They just stormed the gate, and we have approximately about 200 people running up the steps right now, and they ran over the police right now. I'm backing up our units to get us out of here to a safer location.
MPD job to Capitol Command. Just advising you that the MPD has declared this a breach at the Capitol as well as a riot at the Capitol.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I grew up on Capitol Hill. And for me, it was really alarming and disturbing to see the Capitol breached and to see the protesters overwhelming the police.
So once they got in, we had several responses, calls for help.
About that time, we started to use some of the biking, or what we call the bike fence, being utilized and as ladders, and the crowd starting to get deeper onto the Capitol grounds.
Protesters are in the building.
Thank you.
Okay, so the House just recessed, and we're watching to see what actions House members will take, if they will leave the floor or not.
My name is Deron Hawkins. I am the Assistant Fire Chief of the Services Bureau. On January 6th, went to a meeting, maybe a conference call, and walked past the office, and I saw on CNN that we had people climbing, ascending the wall of the U.S. Capitol grounds. So I was saying to myself, this is not good. So I turned on my radio, and I started responding down to our Fire Operations Center. Halfway down there, I was directed to go to U.S. Capitol Police headquarters on the 7th floor to serve as a senior level liaison officer.
We have a report of 2 Capitol police officers that are injured.
So we knew we had a lot of injuries. There was a lot of assaults, pepper spray being used. So we knew we had some decon issues to address.
So like the pepper sprayed people would come out and ask, can you rinse my eyes out? But then a lot of them would turn around and go right back.
At the command post, we established unified command with Capitol, MPD, all the law enforcement agencies that was there. And the goal was to respond in lockstep with them to make sure if we was going to extract and remove people, we had protection of law enforcement.
We were assigned to get some of our resources off the grounds because the crowds were getting a little bit hostile, more movement, and we wanted to make sure our resources really didn't get stuck on the grounds.
It was an honor to be at the JOC and to watch Mayor Bowser also kind of take control of the situation, to see her call the House Speaker, who at that point was, hiding somewhere on the Capitol grounds, and to talk to her about getting the National Guard on the campus.
My biggest takeaways was that request for National Guard assets when you couldn't move them because you had to get permission. And DC is unique because it's not a state. We function as a state, but we're not a state, and the process of requesting the military, it has to be approved by the Secretary of Defense.
We're getting reports of a fire that was in the visitor center of the Capitol. Investigated that, actually went back inside to the fire control room to see if we had anything on the fire control panel, to see if we had any active fires, which we didn't.
We were actually trying to get the U.S. Capitol Police to provide us a liaison for a command unit. And while we're in the process of doing that is when the first time we entered the Capitol, we got a report of the person who had been shot.
I was inside the Capitol building, was actually assisting with an injured officer at the time with our public information officer, Doug Buchanan, and we were notified by Capitol Police that there was a gunshot wound victim at the south entrance. Immediately went there, found that there was a victim there.
Report of one shot in the Capitol. Report of a shooting in the Capitol. Trying to ascertain information now. If you want to send me a EMS supervisor and a light EMS team to meet me over here, we'll go inside and see what's going on. Copy?
Chief Holmes went in to find out exactly where she was and what we needed, and I went to the command post to make sure they had appropriate units coming in and to guide them in. And then I brought the units into Chief Holmes.
So I'm sending the aide out to get the resources, and he'll meet me. He knows where to meet me. I'm sending the aide out to get those resources.
Capitol Commander Recon, is this going to be an active shooter event, or is this just one shot? I need more information.
Trying to figure out what exactly was going on, if it was an active shooter situation, how to get units to the best location, how to extricate that victim.
Not an active shooting, just one shot. Recon priority. We do have one shot in the chest. Need the resources up here now, immediately.
My name is EMS Captain Lakeisha Lacey. I am assigned as the operations captain of our Street Calls Mobile Integrated Health Division of the Fire Department. But on January 6th, I was assigned to the South Division Command. When the call came in, I was dispatched along with Engine 6 and Medic 10 for the person shot. We were greeted at the security gate by Sergeant Timothy Bennett, who greeted us with U.S. Capitol Police.
6 to Recon. Right now you got Engine 6 and Medic 10 will be coming. They're rendezvousing with your aide and coming to your location. You copy, Recon?
We gathered our equipment. We then was escorted to the victim.
I was luckily enough to have the PIO with me that was able to make those radio transmissions for me until I think it was EMS 9 and the transport unit exactly where we were to bring the stretcher while I was helping the patient.
We quickly extradited the patient out of the area where we found her into a transport unit where we continued ALS measures.
The only time I ever felt a little bit, cautious was when the woman who got shot, when we brought her to the ambulance, the crowd was quite angry and upset.
Bring the patient out. We cannot make way through the crowd. Our fear was that the crowd was just so hostile that in the best efforts of giving the patient her best chance, that we had to rapidly move her to a place where we could work and keeping ourselves safe all at the same time.
Ready, patients coming out. Southside Capitol. CPR in progress. Patients coming out, patients out.
We continue life-saving measures and transport. The scene was very, very, very chaotic, but I must say that in the height of all of it, even with the protesters being surrounded, they too were very much concerned about the patient that we had. We met no opposition gaining entrance and receiving the patient. When we came out with her on the stretcher to move her to the transport unit, they made way for us.
Either the protesters were overly friendly and would stop you and say, "Oh, thank you so much for your service," or they were very hostile. There wasn't any in between that I witnessed.
This is by far not the worst that I've seen. It's probably just one of two of the most unexpected events that I've been a part of since I've been here.
Up in the command center, there's cameras everywhere, and you could see some of the activity. You could see a lot of activity. We was listening to radio transmission. You was hearing conversation, the resources being moved from another law enforcement agency.
They were, of course, closing entrances to keep people from entering. It was difficult among the chaos sometimes to get a clear answer from what's the best way to get in the building, which is the best way to get out.
Call takers weren't really getting good information. We had our tablet up to see if calls were coming in and if we could determine where it was, if we could send someone in. A majority of it was with the crowd coming out and seeing us and telling us that someone was injured or something was going on, and try to get a good idea of where it was. And again, I would send a recon team of probably 2 or 3 people in there with minimal EMS equipment to go see if they could find it.
We have a total of 6 officers that are injured.
When my phone kept ringing, it was a number of times I've been called from the officer attending position, and it was more officers injured, and it was like, wow, I'm looking at the cameras, I'm hearing a radio transmission, and I was saying, do I have situation awareness? Because the phone kept ringing, and I think up to today, we treated up to evaluate over 50 law enforcement.
There hasn't been that many times where I'm in fear of my actual life, like somebody harming me physically, and I can't respond. You always know that there's going to be people that you have to help. Like regardless, it doesn't matter if you're a murderer or, you know, whatever. It's our job to not judge, and we're just here to help. But it definitely makes it harder when you know that the people that you're helping are actually harming, you know, our brothers in blue, and have no regard for me. Don't care if you live or die.
We're evaluating an officer that was drugged down the steps, kicked in the head 3 times, had a vomiting episode. He's going to need to be transported for evaluation. We need to transport him for health.
Is that in addition to the officer they just brought out at 703 Bravo?
That's a problem.
Was notified that a lot of tear gas and OC spray was being utilized, set up a decon station for the police and for the general public. We immediately were notified that, hey, there's a CPR victim. This area was known just south or just below the Crip area, and it was the West Terrace level.
Like I said, we have the medics with Park Police with us.
I don't know how we could have to get to that area without force protection and having the extra, I think one of them or 2 of them were doctors and some paramedics really assisted us. So we were able to get with a Capitol Police officer right then and there. He took us to where this area was. It just so happened that this area was also almost like a battleground between protesters and the police, and the individual that was experiencing the cardiac event was right there in that area.
What's the best access to you?
I'll let you know we have heavy CS in the area.
I remember going down the hallway. I remember seeing a lot of injured officers on the side of the hallway. They were gasping for air, and I couldn't really understand why from a distance. They were gasping for air, and some of them were bleeding. Asked them if they were okay. They said they're just taking a breather, and some of them were wounded but didn't need medical assistance. So we kept on going through, and that's when we encountered almost like a wall of tear gas. So they were gasping for air because there was so much tear gas. When we got to the victim, there was almost like a puddle of CS gas or pepper spray that the victim was laying there. That's how much that was being utilized. Also, there was a lot of dry chemical extinguishers that were being utilized on the police. So that it was all in the air. It was very rancid. And we finally made it to where the victim was.
Recon Capitol Command. We are on the scene with the CPR patient. We get a unit to come with a stretcher. 2 or 3 man team will be sufficient.
We were able to find a old Army style cot. One of the medics intubated the patient right then and there. CPR was started, and we were able to package the victim and remove the victim to the East Wing, where we met a medic transport unit.
My name's Ellen Curlin. I'm assigned to EMS 7 on the 4th Platoon, which is the EMS supervisor for Special Operations. I just got dispatched to replace the supervisor who had transported the woman who got shot.
Sean McGee, firefighter paramedic assigned to 3 engine.
They said they were sending a medic unit with me. I was coming at the Capitol from the west, and they were coming at the Capitol from the east, and had to wait for direction about her exact location. So someone came out to direct us to where she was.
We went to the south side at South Capitol and Independence. Came in on the south end of the building, had to go into the hallway, and when we got there, myself, Captain Curland, and Technician Hansiford from 17 Engine had a female patient that was being brought to us by, I believe it was Sergeant Bennett and some officers that were in the Capitol buildings.
When we got into the Capitol, they had her on some kind of dolly or pull cart, and they were pulling her down the hallway towards us. We'd worked her for 30 minutes, and she had been down approximately 20 minutes before we were even able to get to her.
We moved her into the hallway where we could work on her own scene. To get out of the building, we had to figure out a way to get the stretcher down steps because all the exits with the ramps were blocked. We weren't able to use those due to a crime scene on one end of the building, and then whoever was still in the building on the other end where the ramps were located. So we had to position the ambulance in a different spot to be able to go down the least amount of steps as possible.
So we loaded her up on the medic unit, which was also kind of difficult because we were nowhere near where the medic unit had initially parked, and the medic unit then transported her to the hospital. This was the most hostile, angry crowd, large crowd that I've ever seen.
What we're watching live at the United States Capitol is police trying to reclaim control of the Capitol.
Paramedic Engine 7 just came off the ground, said they assessed about 50 injured officers inside on the grounds of the Capitol.
At the Capitol building, they were moving pretty quickly to restore the gates and the barricades that had been set up before the riot started at the Capitol grounds, and there was a broadcast from some type of speaker letting people know that the curfew had begun. And you saw that scene clear out pretty quickly.
We're establishing 2 casualty collection points at this time.
Communication to all units and stations concerned. Any member that was being held and has properly been relieved may do so at this time. The ready alert status will remain effective until further notice.
We're getting reports there's going to be more activity inside the Capitol around 2000 hours. We're going to maintain the presence of what we have until then. We'll see what it looks like after that.
Up top of that dome, you can see that light, and that is lit when Congress traditionally is in session. When the House or Senate is in session, that light is lit. And it's a symbol, James, to people, you know, if you have worked around the Capitol or worked in the Capitol, as you're driving by or walking by and you see that lit, you know that lawmakers are at work, right? That Congress is functioning to some degree or another. And so it is striking to see it lit tonight on this terrible day. And it is a symbol and a signal that they expect to get back to work tonight.
But thanks to the swift efforts of U.S. Capitol Police, federal, state, and local law enforcement, the violence was quelled. The Capitol is secured, and the people's work continues.
Command to ambulance 06. Ambulance 06. For command. Yes, ambulance 6. You go ahead and return to operation. Restore to channel 01.
Medic 51 to command. We have been released from Norfolk Division.
Engine 16 command. We're released by Capitol Command. We are heading back to Engine 16 quarter, relieve 1 member.
I knew I led a National Guard unit for a doctor and a paramedic into the basement of the Capitol. That officer was Officer Sicknick, the one who passed away.
I'm Dave Hoagland. I'm a lieutenant at Engine 9. And on January 6th, I got called in from home to staff Rescue Squad 4. And we were told to go down to the Capitol to relieve Rescue Squad 1.
My name is John Hope. I'm a firefighter. I'm assigned to Rescue Squad 3. On January 6th, I was working overtime. I was assigned to Rescue Squad 4 with 4 other members of the department. We were sent to the Capitol grounds. We heard the radio traffic from Capitol Police that they had a officer in cardiac arrest on the in the north corridor in the stairwell.
We have a medical logo inside the Capitol, CPR on the Capitol police officers.
Me and the rest of the crew got escorted down into the Capitol, where we found a downed officer.
The patient was laying on the ground on his side, had other officers around him. I asked what exactly had happened, and the other officers said they didn't know that he had just collapsed.
It's just going to be a priority 1 non-conscious person, Chief.
The other officers were trying to do CPR on him, but he was actually not in cardiac arrest. So we kind of pulled everybody back, and then the Capitol physicians got there, and we started coordinating his care while we were waiting on Engine 2, Medic 2, and EMS 4, who were initially dispatched on the run to get down there.
Engine 2, Medic 2, EMS 4, north barricade, center door. They're going to have an escort waiting.
My job was to determine where we were in the building and figure out what was the best entrance to get him out of. And the elevators were all out of service.
My name is Philip Lambert. I'm an EMS captain at DC Fire Department. On January 6th, I was going down to the Capitol building to relieve another EMS supervisor in the North Command. Protest activity had ceased and the Capitol area was quite calm. Once we arrived on scene, we began to put our COVID PPE on. We made our way inside the building with escort by Capitol Police.
Okay, I copy. You advise Medic 2 is going to transport, correct?
That's affirmative. They're still packaging the patient right now, but we'll be getting moving once they get up to the unit.
And the elevators were all out of service. The Capitol police officers and the guardsmen actually had him in a wheelchair and carried him up the spiral staircase to get to the floor we needed to be to get him out. It was not an easy effort, and they did an admirable job.
And then transported him up to the ambulance, where we provided some additional care and treatment, and then transported him to the hospital.
Clearly there were some security failures, like from the top down, and I think we responded in the best way that we could, and just good that the department, I suppose, was in a state where we had some extra apparatus that we'd go down, because that hasn't always been in the case in recent years. It was a pretty remarkable scene walking through there, watching them clean up. The first time I went into the Capitol was as a 3-year-old, and I've been in there various times throughout my life, so it was kind of surreal to see it in this state after everything just happened with trash everywhere. It smelled really bad, and the police officers were showing us where people had forced their way into different offices and were smoking marijuana, and there was just an absolute army of police officers everywhere. And it was just, it was kind of just like after a battle. There was all these discarded items there that I guess the protesters had, and so it was certainly sort of disheartening to see it in that state, but it was kind of a privilege to be part of the group and know that we're part of a department that's responsible for, the good and welfare of those buildings and the people inside them.
I think we were hoping for the best, but we got the worst.
What we see can be super ugly. It just made you realize how much hate is there.
We should not ever be caught off guard like that. And like, we learned a lot from 9/11. We learned, we placed programs in place, and the department grew exponentially from 9/11. And we'll grow from this. It's a learning curve for all of us.
The one thing that we've learned over the last few months, and I've been fortunate enough to be involved in the majority of the civil disturbance that we've had, the rioting and the protesters, the counter-protesters, that the special event format that is rigid. Here's a box, here's what happens inside this contained box. It doesn't work for these events. So you have to be flexible and you have to be able to build it out. So as the incident grew, we grew with it. It was just like a house fire. You have one house on fire, as the house spread, you know, next house catches on fire, next house catches on fire. You build it out, and you know, you do your divisions, groups, and sectors. We plan to address the emergencies within this small area. You know, we expect to have lots of people. We expect not to be able to get to them. We expect to have difficulty removing them. We don't expect to have a hostile crowd preventing us from helping.
We anticipated that we would deal with civil unrest that day. We were preparing for that. We were also preparing for routine medical emergencies, and Area Command was in place to support those resources and also monitor the department's resources as a whole. So they were prepared for that. What was unusual is that the event occurred at the Capitol.
The operation communication is always key, and I'm not certain, but I was hearing there was communication issues. How do we come together on a fast-moving, let's designate some channels that we can use, everybody can use, law enforcement have their channels, but we need to have a unified channel, communication channel that we can talk. We do have one in place, but we don't practice it enough, we don't utilize it enough.
We couldn't set up a unified command with, because we couldn't get any police officers out. Everybody was so, they were all busy.
Unfortunately, you know, the U.S. Capitol Police really were overwhelmed, and I think we could have had a little more direction from them on, you know, help telling where we were in the building and the best entrances and exits to use. I think maybe in the future a protocol for the best places if you're in certain portions of the Capitol to take injured and sick people.
Someone in our command unit probably would have helped dramatically, so we could talk to them if they were seeing something or if they needed resources directed, that we could have a face-to-face with them. OUC was dispatching calls that really should have been assigned to us and told us and let us put resources toward that. It was just, we're sending multiple resources.
I spend a lot of time in my position advocating for resources for the fire department. And sometimes it's hard to explain to policymakers why we need such a large reserve of vehicles and why we need so many people trained in all hazards in our department. And now I can tell them January 6th is the exact reason and exact example of why we need that, and having it as a result of the support we've had from this administration on that day made all the difference.
For the first time in quite a while, we were able to put a significant amount of additional resources in service with no notice. So what we really need to do now is continue to focus on preparedness, continue to focus on expanding that capability, and make sure that we maintain that moving forward.
I am proud of the job that we did as a fire department. Looking back, there's not much differently I think we would do. I think we really did a good job. I think that we covered our bases. I think that people that needed help got help.
So I was able to grab Lieutenant Hutchins early on to the incident, and he helped me at the command post, which was crucial. You know, technology wasn't working for us. We weren't able to find a tablet or anything that worked. So Chief McCoy at Fire Ops was really crucial also in giving us that pertinent information to help us branch out the incident. Chief Smith and Chief Westfield, they all had their own divisions on each side of the Capitol, and they really helped manage those resources. And definitely Chief Holmes and Sergeant Bennett, who was the recon group that day, they did a phenomenal job. I mean, without their work, there's no doubt that more people could have been injured or hurt or killed. A lot of the members that went into the Capitol and were around the complex, you know, they did so without police protection. They did so putting their own selves in jeopardy, their own safety at risk. They were going through clouds of pepper spray. They were dealing with hostile people. You know, they were going in areas without the police, you know, into unknown situations. You know, it was really a team effort.
One of the things I definitely was proud of that we didn't have any injuries.
Everybody was shining. Everybody was focused. We came together. And nobody was stressing out. Nobody was, you know, at the level where I was at. You know, everybody was focused, and everybody knew what we had to get done.
I think the city did a great job in having those command centers up and operational.
Our on-scene commanders had to make some quick decisions. Our company commanders, when they first responded, had to make some quick decisions. And overall, they absolutely did an incredible job, and they made the right decision, right? They engaged, they made an impact, and because of the decisions that they made and the situation that they placed themselves in, they helped a lot of people.
When I left that day, I was like, man, this is the greatest fire department in the world.